Hey everybody, Bobcat here up in the Main Street Farms kitchen. I'm excited to do a cooking video for you guys, especially because I got something special to share with you. We were just gifted a brand new cast iron skillet from this company, Field Company. It's made in the USA. This is a beautiful product right here. It's pretty light for a cast iron, but it's still got the heft of a cast iron, nice and smooth. And yeah, it's a pretty nice pan. So I'm gonna make a something special for you guys. One of my favorite summertime meals for this time of year. It's gonna consist of a lot of things that have been showing up in the CSA shares, or even if you're just a farmer's market customer, the summer staples. We got squash. We got basil, we got Swiss chard, garlic, onions, and of course, tomatoes. I really wanted to make this meal for you guys. It's one of my favorite things to make in my cast iron skillet at home, but after hearing about this thing, I think I might have to go out and buy one myself. So we're gonna go over a couple of things real quick. First of all, the summer squashes. We got your basic zucchini. We got a yellow zucchini here. It's got the green stem. It's probably a yellow zucchini. We do grow yellow squash as well, yellow straight neck squash. And this zucchini we get a lot of questions about. You see it's got those kind of like bumpy stripes to it. It's an Italian heirloom variety. It's known as a Romanesco or Romanesca squash, another form of zucchini. We got 3 zucchinis. I'm going to cut them 3 different ways, just because why not? Cut the end off, right? So this first one, it's kind of small, so I'm just going to do a basic, what I would call coins. Quick and easy. I like that with the small squash. With the yellow zucchini, to cut it in half long ways. And then I'm just going to do what I would call half moons. Kind of like half a coin. There's no necessarily rhyme or reason behind what size and shape to cut things in. It's all a matter of preference. To me, cooking is like an art. You know, it's a lot of room for your own interpretation and your own creativity, unlike baking, which I'm not very good at, which baking is more, I feel like, an exact science, where you need, you know, a quarter cup of this, you know, a cup of that. With the zucchini, cut it in half, right? I cut it in half again, and we're just gonna quarter it. A lot of these are basic cuts, but everyone's on a different path on their food journeys, right? Some of us have been cooking since as long as we can remember. And for some people, you know, it's still kind of new. So I like to go over this stuff because you never know when you're going to learn something new, right? So I like hanging out with my buddy Chef Eli. He's always teaching me something new. All right, onion. Again, chop off the ends. Again, something basic, but I like to cut into my onion not completely all the way, because if you leave a little bit together, it makes it that much easier to peel, right? And I like when things are quick and easy. Yeah, I'm going to do these 2 different ways. So this one I'm going to go long ways, straight up and down the onion. I'm sure Chef Elias is here. He'd be critiquing my cutting, but you know, we can't all be professional chefs. And then this one we're going to do rings. And that comes out like rings, right? So different textures, different styles. So normally I would keep my cuts consistent. If I was making a dish, I'd go one way or another. You know, cooking, it's like a canvas. You can do whatever you want to do. Next up, we're going to do chard. We wash a lot of the vegetables before we pack them, before they get in your CSA or the market. But it never hurts to wash your vegetables again. It's not going to hurt them. You know. chard. I feel like the chard cooks down pretty well. It doesn't really matter how you cut it. And now for the tomatoes. This is one of my favorite knives for cutting tomatoes. Let me get a closer look here. As you can see, it's a serrated knife, but it's a very thin, fancy serrated knife. But it's not that fancy. You know where I got this knife? Syracuse Regional Market. There's a guy that sells knives. Even if you're not in Syracuse, you can order them online. And I love these knives for tomatoes because they just cut right into it nice and easy, right? And you know, the thing with tomatoes, you don't want to like mash them up too much. If you use a regular knife, sometimes you put too much pressure on it. And these knives are nice because you can just slice right into it. So yeah, usually with my tomatoes, I cut them in half, and then I cut it in half that way. I cut it into a couple strips. I cut it into chunks. And so this meal we're making here, I don't necessarily have a name for it, but it's just something about the combination of the squash with the tomatoes, the onions, and the chard. It's just one of my favorite summertime meals, you know, along with tomato cucumber salad, which I'm sure you've been eating a lot of. But, you know, there's something about the combo of the tomatoes, you know, with the squash and with the onions, and then the chard, and then you throw some basil in there. And someone said to me the other day, like, oh, it's kind of like ratatouille without the eggplant. And I never really thought about that, but it's like, yeah, it is kind of like ratatouille without the eggplant. But the thing that I love about this meal is it is very versatile. There's, you know, whether you want to put it with pasta, put it over rice, you could, you know, eat it on its own, you know, dip some bread in it. It goes good with eggs, or, you know, sometimes when you're just swimming in squash and tomatoes, when I have a lot of squash and tomatoes this time of year, I like to make a big old pot of this dish, and it's really easy to cook it up, freeze it, throw it in a little Tupperware, and then in the middle of winter, you have a nice little taste of summer, right? It's almost like a sauce ready to go. If you want to make it a little more heavy on the tomatoes, it gets very saucy. If you want it to be more, you know, like a ratatouille, you might go a little bit heavier on the squash. So, you know, the basil, you don't have to go too crazy with the basil, but usually I try to pull the stems off a little bit, get mostly leaf. And usually I just kind of bunch it up a little bit, roll it around a little bit. And again, like I said, garlic if you want it. Garlic is optional. I'll leave that up to you guys. Alright, I think we're ready to go. Alright, so now we're over by the stove. We're ready to rock. We got the skillet heating up, getting nice and hot. Once again, thank you to the Field Company for gifting us this beautiful cast iron. I'm very excited to try it out with y'all. So, it's always important to make sure your pan is well greased. Usually I grease it after I use it, and then again, I put a little more on when I start cooking. Get that nice coating in there. So, like any good Italian, I start with the garlic and the onions. Now, it's good to break your onions up if you did it in rings. That's the nice thing about the strips, is they're already broken up. But as I learned from my good friend Chef Elias, if you don't separate your onions, they're going to cook unevenly. You don't want that. You want your onions to all be the same consistency. Alright, so now that we got our onions cooking nice and hot here, stir it up a little bit. Now, if you're not familiar with cooking with cast iron, it takes a little bit of a learning curve. I've been doing it for quite some time now. Growing up, I never was into cast iron, but once I was out on my own and I saw some friends cooking with it, once I went cast iron, I never went back. It heats up, it holds the heat really well, and it's just such a great pan. You know, some people are scared to use metal on metal with the cast iron, but you know, as long as it's nice and seasoned, you shouldn't have to worry about scratching it or anything like that. You know, I keep talking about the season the pan, how important that is. You give it a nice coat of oils, and it protects the pan, and it'll last for a long time. So, I like to add seasonings in layers. So we're going to start with just a little basic salt and pepper. Put salt and pepper in pretty much everything I cook. Throw that in there. Salt, little pepper. Alright, I'm going to make a little room in the middle there. Put a little more oil in. Next up, we're going to do that squash. Alright, so now I got the squash cooking. Stir that up a little bit. Sometimes if I want to add some liquids, I'll add some apple cider vinegar or balsamic vinegar. But sometimes I feel like once you put the tomatoes in, that will be enough seasoning. Speaking of seasonings, next up I do some garlic powder. My wife always gives me a hard time. She said, you know, you already put in garlic. Why do you need garlic powder? I'm Italian, that's why. Never enough garlic. Chili powder, also one of my favorites. Throw that in there. Add a little oil for good measure. Alright, time to add the tomatoes. I may have cut too much Swiss chard, so I don't think I'm going to put all this in here. Alright, so now it's been cooking for a couple of minutes. Might have overfilled it a little bit. We'll try to stir in the chard. Alright, last round of seasoning. Do a little bit of cumin, a little more salt, a little more pepper. And we're going to top it with some basil. Stir that in one last time.
It's a song about vegetables reminding everybody that they're good at what we all know.
The finished product looks like.
Think about your food.
Oh yeah, smell of it. tomato, squash, onion, chard, basil, summer classic. Try it out. Make sure you check out our good friends at Field Company. I'll send you guys a link. And yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what other videos you'd like me to make in the future. I love cooking, so we're gonna do more of these. Cheers.
Remind everybody that they're incredible.